Welcome back to the show. My guest today is a brilliant scientist, and we're talking about brain health. We're talking about nervous system health. We're talking about the myelination of nerves. My guest wrote a book called Breaking Alzheimer's, which if you or anyone you know has any issues, whether it's cognitive or dementia or whatever the case may be, this book is for you. And frankly, it explores and explains a lot of the work that Dayan has done in his career. So Dayan is his first name, Dayan Goodenowe. Dr. Dayan Goodenowe is his full name. He is the president and CEO of his company called Prodrome Sciences. Dayan has made some incredible discoveries. He's invented a device with which to measure plasmalogens, which are the heart and soul of the discoveries that he's made. I'm going to let him tell you all about it. But let me tell you, this is such exciting work. You're going to love this. I loved it. So anyway, if you decide that you want to get your hands on some of these supplements, you can use the link in the show notes. And that's my practitioner link, and you can go in there and order some stuff. If you have any questions for me, you can reach out to me through my website, natniddam.com. And of course, you can join my new community, the BSP community on Mighty Networks, where in the new year, we're going to be doing a cool experiment. We've arranged this with Prodrome Sciences, where people will get to measure their baseline plasmalogen levels, do a 30-day supplementation program, and then measure on the other side and see what shift they've seen in their sleep, in their mental clarity. It's going to be awesome. So if you don't know anything about this BSP community, you're going to want to head over to the website, natniddam.com, look for BSP community, and you'll get all the information about what it's all about and how to join. Until then, thank you so much for being here. I totally appreciate you guys. Once again, the website for Dr. Dayan Goodenowe is prodromesciences.com.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Dayan Goodenowe. I am so excited about this conversation. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Nat. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, we first met a little over a year ago, actually, at an event, and it took me a while to kind of get my head around finally reaching out to you. And I think I was, nobody really knows this about me, but deep down inside, I'm a kind of shy person. And though I've overcome it somehow, but I finally reached out to you through a mutual connection. And when you said yes, I was like, yes, okay, amazing, because this is a topic I think that is critical to be exploring with people.
Yeah, it's a crazy plasmalogen story, and obviously my background is pretty diverse, and you kind of end up getting known for one thing when you've done a million other things. But yeah, so my background is in psychiatric care. So my PhD is in understanding the mechanisms of psychiatric diseases, and I'm a synthetic chemist and understand biochemical mechanisms of disease. We have here at our facility in Temecula probably the most advanced analytical technology in the world. We use ion cyclotrons, magnetic sector, inductively coupled plasma, mass specs, triple quads. So basically anything on Earth we measure. And when you look at health as a phenotype, like if you can physically see a difference between person A and person B, there's a biochemical reason behind that. And so there's a causation in disease. And people get caught up in the symptomatic portions of the disease, which is obvious. You feel something, you feel sick, and that triggers this inflection point and say, hey, I better do something about this. But obviously that's a long-term consequence. And we focus on disease because most of medicine has been acute care, and rightfully so. How do I keep someone from dying in the next 2 hours, for crying out loud? And you need that, okay? You need people that can take care of you instantly. But the chronic issues are not really dealt with because, like, if you're not spurting blood and going to die. It's kind of say, okay, you're triaged to something else. Come back and see me when you got something serious happening to you.
Yeah,
and what happens? Yeah, exactly. And what happens then when we think of medicine in this format, you can see it's logical. We say, hey, how do I compare disease to normal? And then we try to age match them because we're trying to figure this out and all that kind of stuff. And then we get this disease focus, and we forget about the other side of the coin, which is the healthy side. And so, in fact, health is actually far more accurately studied than disease, because of all these research studies that we do, we always have a control arm. And so, in fact, we actually have a much higher degree of knowledge and accuracy in measuring health than we do in measuring disease. And then from health, you get a deviation from health. So we actually know what health is. And then when you deviate from that health, you are at a risk factor, like type 2 diabetes or whatnot. And these factors, this deviation from health, are not necessarily immediately symptomatic. And so I tell people disease is person specific. Okay, your genetic background will give you a predisposition to X, Y, and Z or Z, depending on what side of the border you're on. And then but the stress is quite ubiquitously around. And so I tell people disease is person specific, but health is person independent. Okay, health is the same for all of us. Your health, my health are the same.
You mean what it looks like, how it expresses?
Yeah, well, it's not ambiguity. Like if you've made it past your first year of life, fundamentally you've got a functioning genome. Okay, and so we don't really reach early infant mortality rates until our 60s. So we have 50 years or so of pretty much you got to get hit by a bus unless you do something stupid. You're not going to die. And then we have this deviation from that health state. And then that deviation from that health state can become quite complex. So one deficiency or one deviation can create multiple diseases.
Right.
And so we get focused on that. And so what I focus on is understanding what that health state is. And it's the old concept that I don't need the engine in my car to seize before I put oil in it. Okay, there's things that I can do and understand that things are supposed to work. The human body is designed to function, and it's supposed to function. And when it's not working properly, you got to fix it, even if you don't feel anything. Okay, it's just common sense. And then we look at longevity. People think of, they get stuck with this portrait of Dorian Gray kind of model, where that's not really reality. That's not how the human body works. And there's a lot of things that looks real when you look at it, that, wow, we're programmed to do this and we're programmed to do that. But that's actually not true. The human body adapts to a situation, and our development is an adaptation development. Even when you talk about epigenetics and you talk about changes, those are adaptations to your environment and your functional needs of the human body. They're not programmed. Okay, they look like they're programmed because we're trying to retrace our steps, but that's your body adapting to the current circumstances that it's being presented to. And then that's what we deal with. And so when you talk about cancer incidence rates and understanding prodrome, so that's the whole concept of Prodrome Sciences, is understanding what is a prodrome of these diseases. And I've studied, I don't even know how, I lost count, but we can diagnose ovarian cancer and colon cancer and breast cancer, and I've published on all this stuff long before it happens. Like, determine who has the high risk for it. And it becomes the science of bald tires, right? It's this concept of saying, hey, you could have a bald tire in your car and you could drive for years if you're on the right streets and you don't hit the right bad circumstance. You could be crazy and you say nothing's wrong with me and never get a flat tire. And the next person with a bald tire can just drive around the corner and have a flat. And the issue is that 95% of all flat tires, if you will, occur in bald tires. It doesn't mean that every bald tire gets flat, but most flat tires are bald. And that's the human epidemiology approach of saying risk leads to disease. And what we do in cancer, for example, is we take that flat tire, we patch it and we put the ball tire back on the road again, which is why the recurrence rates for diseases are always so much higher than incidence rates in people who've never had a disease in the first place.
Right. Well, and also the patch is a bit toxic, right? So that can be added in.
Yeah, that doesn't help any. And so and so when we did all that work, that's where the Plasmalogen story came in, and it kind of came out of left field in that we were doing work on dementia and changes in cognitive status in individuals. And this class of membrane lipids was determined to be low in blood. And the correlation with cognition was quite shocking. And this is in the elderly population. And then we went dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the causation. And really, you're now at a point where you have a class of molecules which really should be classified as a vitamin. Okay, it's like we're talking about vitamin B0, if you will, in a sense, because it is a critical component of human health. Normally, we make most of it ourselves. We do get a little bit in our nutritional world, but very, very little. Almost none after breastfeeding ends, because that's where the main source of the plasmalogens are. And then that's kind of where the Plasmalogen story came in. So the mechanisms, and so then I've written the book on breaking Alzheimer's. It's not all about plasmalogens. It's about understanding the basis of the symptomology versus pathology.
Mhm.
Okay, here's another thing where people, it's always difficult when it's like reading a book from the middle without reading the beginning, right? So you start the book in the middle and you say, oh, this is an interesting book, I'm going to keep reading it. But you have to kind of guess, well, how did the beginning begin? Like and that's what happens so many times in medicine, is that we start these stories in the middle of the story, right? And we don't say, where did this come from? So we take a look at Alzheimer's patients. Well, look at this, look at these amyloid plaques, look at these neurofibrillary tangles. Wow, these things must be bad because you're not supposed to have these in your brain. They must be the cause of Alzheimer's. They must be toxic. They must be actually chewing up my neurons. And if I could only get rid of these tangles and plaques, my brain would be super normal. Well, it sounds logical, okay, but it's totally based in fantasy. It's not real at all. The amyloid plaques and the tangles, those are symptoms of a sick brain. Those are things that clearly you shouldn't have in your brain, and if you have them, something is wrong. But where did they come from? Like, it didn't get injected into your brain just for the purpose of destroying neurons. And so these are things that happen in parallel. And so the membrane composition, these plasmalogens, and we'll get into them in detail, lead to the causation of a lot of these diseases. And so that's why I've studied it pretty extensively. And it's not just plasmalogens, overall nutrition, mitochondrial health. These are things that we deal with every day. There's the phosphatidylcholine system is another one that is dramatically underdiagnosed in the world. And so that's what we do. And then when we talk about advanced health and advanced function, it's about creating a biochemical reserve capacity. Vitality comes from making sure that all your little secondary systems are fed, okay? Because your body is going to triage, okay? It's going to make sure your heart pumps and your lungs breathe, okay? And if it has to make a choice between your heart and some cosmetic skin cells, it's going to choose the heart. Yeah. Okay, and so if you want vitality, you need excess. You need to have a reserve capacity so that you have enough excess for all the little things. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. And so plasmalogens are one of those big problems that as we get older, as we're young, we're gratuitous, if you will. We waste our plasmalogens, okay? And then later on, we just don't make enough of them for numerous reasons. And then our brains start bleeding out of plasmalogens the same way that happens in infants if they're not giving enough plasmalogens, either from the mother or through mother's milk or premature births, or they have genetic manufacturing issues. So that's kind of what we do. And so that's kind of, that's kind of the roundabout philosophy of how we get to where we're going. And then the Plasmalogen story, we can just dig in wherever you want to on that one.
I think I'd like to start at the beginning. I'd like to start about, you mentioned to me earlier that plasmalogens become available to a developing baby around week 35 in utero through the mother's placenta. And then and babies are essentially born plasmalogen deficient. And then they get the bulk of their plasmalogens from mother's milk. So what is it that we can do? I guess number one is what can we provide plasmalogens to premature babies? Let's say they can't be breastfed. I mean, ideally, a premature baby is going to get mother's milk anyway,
Right.
but usually these things happen with a bit of trauma. Mother's milk's not always available.
Exactly.
And so, is there a is, for example?
Absolutely. So yeah, we
Yeah.
So myself being a chemist, and we found out these plasmalogens were associated with Alzheimer's disease, right? The first step was saying, well, how does the body make these things? How do we, what food could we possibly get these from? How do we restore? That was the obvious question, right? And so the problem with plasmalogen. So first of all, what are plasmalogens?
Let's talk about.
So we're talking about something that nobody knows what the hell we're talking about. And so, what the hell are these guys think? So plasmalogens are a type of membrane phospholipid. Okay, that's what they're. So the human body, if you take a look at some of the core physiological constructs of the human body, one of them is compartmentalization, the ability to do certain functions in one area of the body without affecting another area of the body. And how the body achieves compartmentalization is through membranes and organelles and cells. And so that's what separates your heart from your lungs, from your brain, is that they're actually in a three-dimensional cell. And that cell is comprised of an outer membrane that isolates it. And then inside those cells, you have intercellular organelles, like your peroxisomes and your mitochondria, your Golgi, your endoplasmic reticulum, your nucleus, all these intracellular compartments. These compartments are enclosed in a lipid membrane vesicle, if you will. And then there's the aqueous environment that has kind of the soup of your cell, if you will. And so this membrane structure that gives this compartmentalization is comprised of phospholipids. And that's how the human body builds its walls. And it's called a phospholipid bilayer. So a phospholipid is like a soap. It has fatty acid side chains that are very, very nonpolar, like your oil and vinegar in your salad dressing, for example. Then it has like your oil, and then it has a polar head group, which is the vinegar part of your oil and vinegar dressing, and it's polar. It likes to be in the water, and so it's all attached. And that's how soap dissolves oil in water, for example. So what happens is these phospholipids organize into what's called a phospholipid bilayer, and the fatty acid side chains from one side like to be with the other side, and their polar head groups stick on the outside. And so then you end up with essentially a biological wall.
Right.
And that biological wall is not homogeneous. There are parts of it that are very, very thick and stiff and protective. And there's some that are very fluid and open and allow transport of materials in and out. And then all those receptors that people talk about and proteins, those are typically embedded in the protein, in the membrane. And so that affects the protein structure and function. So it's a kind of a core, we take it for granted, but it's one of the core constructs of human physiology. Mm-hmm. So plasmalogens are part of that. And they affect the fluidity. And they're not a small amount, like 20% to 30% of your entire brain phospholipids. Like we're talking a very, very large amount. High concentrations in your heart, your lungs, your kidneys. Okay, so these are very critical components of human physiology. And there's about 3 or 4 core functions. One of them, we'll talk about all 4 of them actually, is the very last step in their manufacture creates a bond called a vinyl ether bond. And you can think of it like a fuse in your electrical system of your car. It's designed to fail before other things fail. And that's why you can kind of think of plasmalogens as your body's cannon fodder, if you will. It sends these things out to be destroyed because normally you'd make a lot of them. But the problem is that last step in their manufacture that makes that vinyl ether bond for the specific purpose of preventing you from losing your CoQ10s and your other antioxidants that are more precious to the body. That makes it dietarily unavailable. So you say, wow, there's so many plasmalogens. Like if I'm having a nice juicy steak or something, am I not eating plasmalogens? Well, you are, but they're being digested by the stomach acids. And so they don't make it into your blood supply. So they're not bioavailable because they're designed to be destroyed by acid. That's what they do. And so that's core. So pound for pound, plasmalogens are probably orders of magnitude the most important free radical scavenger in the human body. Okay. And that's why when we take plasmalogens, your C-reactive proteins usually drop malondialdehyde. We just published this. Your malondialdehyde levels go down, your catalase function goes up. And so the antioxidant capacity of plasmalogens is quite dramatic. So that's the chemical side of it. The physiological side of it is, since you have so many of them, they're not all the same. You have some of your membranes are designed to be like the plastic coating on a copper wire, if you will. They're impervious. They're designed to be like a protective coating so that the neurological impulses going through that axon is clean and clear and fast, right? And so that's your omega-9. So the plasmalogens, those plasmalogens contain fatty acids that you get from olive oil, basically, but your body can also make omega-9.
Yeah.
So it tells you an important part here. The white matter of your human body, which is mostly omega-9 plasmalogens, all parts of it can be made from scratch. You can make plasmalogens from plain old saturated fat. Like you can make it from the most basic building block of food in the world. Okay, any kind of fat your body can turn into a plasmalogen. Any kind of fat your body can turn into an omega-9 fatty acid. So that's why oleic acid isn't technically an essential fatty acid, but we still don't get enough of it. So you still want some in a good quantity in your diet, at least to counteract the excessive omega-6 that we get, linoleic acid. Anyways, so you can make that's the omega-9. That's for your myelin sheath in the brain, which I'm going to get to for your question long time in. And then also your Schwann cells for your peripheral neurons and so on and so forth. Now, when your neurons connect with other neurons or with your muscles at the neuromuscular junction or a synapse, now that copper wire and the coating gets bare and you're at the switching part. And now you're communicating. And how cells communicate is by the release of neurotransmitters through a vesicular fusion process. So they store these neurotransmitters in a little presynaptic bouton, and inside that bouton there's a little sphere of neurotransmitters, again in a lipid coating. And that has to fuse to the membrane, and it releases the neurotransmitters, which can then go across and connect to the next neuron. And same thing with the muscles. That fusion process requires very fluid membranes, the exact opposite type of membrane that is protecting it while it gets there. That fluidity is driven by the omega-3 plasmalogens, specifically DHA plasmalogens. And your level of cognition is extremely correlated with the level of these DHA plasmalogens in your brain. We just published a big neuropathology study a couple months ago on that with Rush University in Chicago. And so that's the third of the issues is synaptic function. And the fourth one is membrane protein regulation. So reverse cholesterol transport. So, cardiovascular function, being able to transport cholesterol effectively in and out of cells. This is why plasmalogens are the antidote to the APOE4 genotype, for example.
Right. That is so cool.
Yeah. So those are the things. So the question is, this is a critically important system of the body that we take for granted. And we take it for granted because typically it's a very, very robust system. We can afford to ignore it. And then, decades later, we are when we're looking at diseases and we're looking at aging in a different way, it kind of rears its head now. But so plasmalogen, the criticalness of plasmalogen starts at the very, very beginning. So as Nat was saying, we were talking earlier, you start using high levels of plasmalogens around gestational week 35. And the way to think about this is that when babies are born plasmalogen deficient, we're born with essentially non-myelinated neurons. So the first part of neurological development is that the baby lays down all these neurons first. They're unmyelinated. Think of taking 1,000 copper wires, bare copper wires, and throwing them down as a big bundle on your living room carpet, okay? And you apply electricity on one end. Well, since there's no protective coating on any of these copper wires, it's scattered. Like the electricity is skipping from one wire to another wire, and it's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens around gestational week 35 then is once so the body lays down these neuron tracks first, then it starts turning on the electricity. And so what happens around gestational week 35 and up to first 3 years of life is when you do your brain goes from essentially 0 plasmalogens to 70% plasmalogens in your myelin. Like it's a massive plasmalogen manufacturing load. And so there's a cell called the oligodendrocyte, mm-hmm. and you can think of it like a nanobot, right? And so what it does, the progenitor cells, once the neurons get turned on, okay, there's electricity going through these copper wires now. And so these nanobots go in there and they sense which of these copper wires have electricity and which don't. And they attach to the ones that have electricity in them, and they say, and they start coating that wire, okay, with what's called a myelin sheath, these oligodendrocytes, and they coat these wires with plasmalogens. And as so when it finds a neuron that's working, it goes there and it coats it. And as it coats it, that neuron now gets stronger and stronger because its signal is now isolated from all these other bare copper wires around it.
Right.
And this is how human brain development works. And so what happens is those neurons that are signaling become protected with the myelin sheath. Those who do not, they degenerate. And then you end up with these strong neurological connections. And what happens when that process is delayed is that the myelination is impaired. And so what happens now is that imagine your copper wires have a very thin coating versus a very thick coating. If it has a very thin coating, a little bit of electricity is fine, but too much electricity basically burns a hole in it and melts the coating. Right. So the quality of that myelin sheath determines the strength and how much power can go through it. So when we talk about diseases of autism or autoimmune or even concussions later on in life, all these neuroinflammatory diseases, is that it's like, and I tell people, you can think about the neurological system like an old radio where you got to tune the station. So first, you hear, if your station is a little bit out of tune, you can still hear the music if you keep the volume low, right? Because you can kind of hear it behind the crackling. But if you crank the volume up, all you hear is noise. So the white matter is the tuning process. It's the one that gets the signal strong and clear. And once you got a clear signal, you can crank the volume up as high as you want to. You blow the walls off your house, rock and roll. Right. And so those are the two components of it. So the omega-9 plasmalogens are designed to tune your neurological system, both in the brain and in your periphery, and it makes sure that your nerve conduction rates are fast and clear. So we talk about diseases like multiple sclerosis and ALS. These are all diseases of white matter degradation.
Yeah.
Right. And then we talk about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. These are mostly diseases of the connection plates, right? So we need to turn those. They're not releasing neurotransmitters effectively, and so therefore the signaling. So you need to turn the volume up on those types of diseases. And of course, like everything in human health, nothing is a complete black and white line. There's always going to be overlap, right? And so you want to support both systems. So that's kind of where the plasmalogen story comes in. So when you talk about premature births and their effect with cognitive and neuromuscular activity at 2 years of age, very, very robust correlation differences. Even in normal gestational babies that have no underlying risk factors or other diseases, when they do advanced MRI of their brains at 2 to 3 or 4 years of age, the cognitive status of the child is correlated to the level of myelination of their brains, even in normally developing children. Okay, and so the process of myelination is absolute. And if you take a look at these charts, you can just see how the brain gets in the myelination process occurs. So now we continue to myelinate, like our brains develop till our 50s.
Yeah.
right? We're still like, people think, oh, my brain's developed, 20s and 30s. No, okay, we're still myelinating in our 40s and 50s. And the maximum myelination rate is somewhere in the 50s. And we don't even know that because we haven't looked at even further progression. But of course, the skull is fixed, like you can't, go forever. And so but now what happens is you have this rapid brain volume loss starting around age 50. By age 70, on average, there's a 20% loss of plasmalogens in the brain. Okay. And then it goes, and it's a dramatic drop off. So we lose white matter first, typically as we age, and then we lose gray matter. So what happens in most of us that don't have, an early infant trauma, or we don't have a genetic mutation, we got a big charity for children with a rare disease called rhizomelic chondrodysplasia punctata. So we offer the plasmalogens to those families and their children free of charge, and we're seeing some pretty dramatic reversals in those diseases. But later on in life, we almost have the same disease process. So you've taken 50 years of your life and you've basically filled your body up. You've slowly, systematically, you've had more than enough plasmalogen manufacturing, so you've had a little bit of excess. And this is a conversation we were talking about earlier about vitality needs excess.
Right.
You need to have a reserve capacity to keep those little crevices full, if you will. And what happens later on in life now is that once you don't have that excess of plasmalogen manufacturing, where when we're younger, we can just throw these things off and we can use them to protect everything else in the body. All of a sudden now, those reserves that you have, you get this delta. So you say you're making just a little bit less than what you need. And so the rate of which the difference between your plasmalogen manufacturing and your plasmalogen need can be little or can be lot. And that little versus lot determines the rate of brain decline, because you just bleed out. And we look at that, and so we look at brain volume. Just gross brain volume is a very big predictor of mortality going forward. So in terms of neuromuscular junction, like sarcopenia, okay, these things are correlated. Cognitive decline and sarcopenia go hand in hand. And again, it's like that shiny object syndrome, where you have one thing that overwhelms our focus. We say, hey, we have cognitive impairment. Well, that's what we got to, we forget that these things don't all happen in isolation. So that's why plasmalogens are this incredibly, basic molecule. And when you start restoring them, you really do get dramatic effects. And as a scientist, and I'm taught to tone it down and be conservative and think of years and years of time to restore this and that and the other thing. And these things actually can happen quite fast.
Yeah.
I've seen pretty dramatic reversals in my own personal family life. Like I have an aunt who had late stage Alzheimer's. She still, she couldn't recognize her son. She was in long-term care. And so I started shipping to my uncle the Prodrome Neuro, which is the omega-3 plasmalogen. And the problem is when people get into these long-term care facilities, you don't really have access to them, right? They get into these structures and you can't really give them the nutritional support. They want everything by a doctor's order with a fax follow-up and the whole 9 yards. And so you've become this
quality is horrible on top of it.
It's a warehousing, right? And it's everyone just doing nothing is protective for most people, right? Like I can't get in trouble for doing nothing for the most part, and which is horrific. So anyway, so we started getting her the plasmalogens, the omega-3. She can now recite everybody in her 50th wedding anniversary. She goes out for dinner with my dad, my uncle, and she understands her environment. She's still in her wheelchair because we can't really get them to do proper physiotherapy because that's too much work. But anyways, that's another story. And but the point is these things actually work. It's not, and when we talk about autistic children and people with ADHD, we see effects in hours and days. They say their brain, like I get doctors sending me emails where their patient says, this is what a normal person must feel like. I've never felt this centered before. I can read a paragraph without stopping every sentence because my mind doesn't wander anymore. I can read an entire paragraph without losing my train of thought. And what we're learning is this neural inflammation is having a much greater effect on our population than we even anticipated. And this omega-9, like with the sleep improvement, once we start lowering the inflammatory component of the brain, and it's really so stupidly simple.
Yeah.
These plasmalogen precursors. So we designed precursors. So if anyone understands Parkinson's, right? Like when the miracle drug for Parkinson's is L-DOPA.
For a while.
Well, for a while, but still, it's miraculous. Okay, in terms of symptom improving dopaminergic function. Yeah, actually, obviously, it's for a while, but we don't give people dopamine, right? So we give them L-DOPA because you can't give them the actual final product. We give a precursor to dopamine because the actual product doesn't get in properly.
Yeah.
So we designed plasmalogen precursors that are a couple steps up the biochemical chain that they are exactly the same chemical structure that's in human mother's milk, by the way, for the omega-9. And the omega-3 is designed for that performance enhancement. But anyways, so now you have these precursors that can come in, and what you're doing now is these oligodendrocytes and these Schwann cells, if they're under stress, it's like a forest fire eating at your house, right? And you're trying to keep the fire from burning, and you're dousing your walls with water. But if you can keep enough water on your house, the fire will definitely eventually pass you by, and your house is standing. This is what these plasmalogens do. They come into your cells of your brain, of your oligodendrocytes, and allows those cells to myelinate at or above whatever rate of attack is occurring. And so they become impervious to this inflammatory cascade. And inflammation, like the microglial inflammation or the macrophage glial inflammation of the periphery, your autoimmune and these diseases that we have, they're designed to sense unhealthy cells, right? Your immune system is designed to sniff out a cell that's not healthy and be attracted to that cell, deliver a final death punch to that cell, and then be there to clean up the garbage. Otherwise, you'd have sepsis all over the place. Now, people talk about the senescence, phenotypes and all that stuff. That's basically what your immune system is designed to prevent from occurring. You're supposed to go there, and how it senses a cell being unhealthy is the peroxidation of the membrane, okay? And that's one of the big things that plasmalogens resolve. And so if you remove the inflammatory trigger, inflammation resolves by itself because you've taken away the immune stimulating signal. And that's kind of where how the plasmalogens really reduce inflammatory phenotypes, because it allows the cells to look healthy and be healthy. And then when they are, the immune system is no longer attracted to them.
Right. And so let me ask you, many kind of questions. So you mentioned TBIs earlier.
Yeah.
How are plasmalogens helpful for TBI? Is there a process in the TBI where there's a demyelination of nerves?
Absolutely.
That plasmalogen helps to restore? And now you were just also talking about neural inflammation, which is obviously a big part of TBIs as well.
Yeah, essentially speaking, if you preload yourself with omega-9 plasmalogens, you basically can't get a concussion. And so, unless, of course, it goes right through your head. And so, but fundamentally, so what happens, see, the brain is a closed system. It's not like bruising your arm, okay? You get a big bruise on your arm, you have a good circulatory system, you got blood flow, you can move material to that bruise, you can move material out of that bruise, okay? When you bruise your... Right. Your brain does not have that type of circulatory system, okay? The brain has to fix itself in situ, okay? It has to use the material in the location of the injury. And so when you get a concussion, what happens is that myelin sheath that I talked to you about, you can think of it like an old cake roll, if you will, okay? And what happens is that cake roll gets inflamed, right? Or a cinnamon bun, right? And so what happens is it kind of opens up like this. It just kind of swells and opens. And so in between all these wrappings, okay, it gets inflamed. And that attracts the immune system, says, oh, something's wrong here. I got to come fix this. And this is what happens with multiple sclerosis. And so multiple sclerosis, when the lesions grow, Okay, they grow because it's like a forest fire until it burns itself far enough out. And then once it burns out, the macrophages disappear. And once the macrophages disappear, then you get remyelination. So when you have this relapsing remitting process in multiple sclerosis, that's what's going on over and over again. In a concussion, what happens? Like, so when we do brain occlusion studies in the laboratory, okay, so when we want to study stroke,
Yeah.
we'll occlude the artery
Yeah.
for 7 minutes or even less. Like if just a few minutes, we'll block blood flow to the brain.
Yeah.
Then we'll wait. Okay, the brain damage doesn't occur right away. We'll wait 4, 5, 6, 7 days until we actually start seeing it. Because then what you've done is you've created this snowballing effect, and then you see this progressive decline and growing of the insult, of the infraction. And so you can think about that. Like we do a small insult, wait a whole week, and then after that week goes by, it continues to grow. And so it's 10 days, then 14 days, and we want to watch the growth of this. And it's driven by the inflammation of the brain. And what happens is once that inflammatory cascade begins, the cells can't catch up.
Right.
Because they're not designed. Like you're not 2 years old anymore, right? You're not in the massive myelination phase. You're in your steady state phase. You're not designed to rebuild this myelin so fast. Like you've kind of forgotten, if you will. And so what happens if you have the plasmalogen precursors in advance or shortly after, okay, then because it has a building material to remyelinate and fix that damage. And that's why, and then obviously the mitochondrial issue is important, because how the immune system kills the cell and causes cell lysis is by mitochondrial disruption. That's what they do. It's a glutaminergic excitotoxic pathway. And so the whole purpose of it is it goes in there and it kills the mitochondria. The cell can't handle its redox, and it bursts open, and the immune system cleans up the garbage. So when we talk about diseases like multiple sclerosis and autism, which are entirely mitochondrial mediated, is that the surrounding cells, okay, so the immune system is supposed to come and attack the damaged cell, kill just the damaged cell. The cells around that inflammation are supposed to be healthy enough to withstand that momentary onslaught. But if your surrounding cells are not able to, or unhealthy themselves, what happens is the inflammation weakens them enough that they become damaged. You know, they now become immune stimulating cells. And then the attack, and it goes on and on. And so that's how autoimmune spreads.
Right.
And the primary reason for that is mitochondrial insufficiency. And so that's, again, this bald tire situation, right? You can be coasting along quite nicely until you get an insult. And then all of a sudden you've triggered, like you didn't know you were mitochondrial compromised until an insult occurs. And then all of a sudden it exposes this weakness. And that's when we talk about these rates of autism dramatically growing over time. And it's from that particular concept, is that you have, everyone in the population is going to have risk factors. There's going to be people that have very, very strong mitochondria, people that have weakened mitochondria, and so on and so forth. And then if the overall stress of the environment grows,
right,
okay, more and more people fall off that cliff.
Right.
And it's just basic mathematics at that point in time.
So do plasmalogens help mitochondria? This must be a stupid question, sorry. Or are you saying
not directly, indirectly?
Piece of the puzzle, and then supporting mitochondria is the other piece of the puzzle. Like I think what you're saying, which makes all the sense in the world to me, is plasmalogens are a critical piece of the puzzle, and yet there's still more to it. Like,
yeah, they're a big hammer, and they turn out to be even a bigger hammer than I thought, because we have such resilience for the most part. But yeah, to me, the magic cocktail for these type of disorders is N-acetylcysteine, acetyl L-carnitine, some CoQ10, maybe some alpha lipoic acid, and the plasmalogen, the omega-9 plasmalogens. That little cocktail there is pretty well that's your emergency stuck on an island cocktail. Like if you had one little group of, assuming you're going to get some B vitamins here and there, like obviously you want your B vitamins and for methyltransferase activity. And creatine is another one that we totally don't take enough of. I'm a big fan of creatine. The methyltransferase, if you have people that are just really struggling to get their homocysteine levels down, get them on a couple grams of creatine and it'll bring it right down. People don't understand what homocysteine is for, where it comes from, but creatine is a big deal. We don't take enough of it. And same thing with phosphatidylcholine. So yeah, so the list goes on and on. But so if you look at these core structural systems and you just feed them, in advance, and the goal here is to create reserve capacity. And if you can provide your body with the right building blocks in advance, what you do is you free up your capacity. So say you have an MTHR deficiency, right? And say your inherent methyltransferase capacity is 50% of normal or 75% of normal. Well, you probably on average only need 10 or 20% of that capacity to live a normal life, right? But the point is that you're kind of on this teeter-totter spot. And so if you take creatine and phosphatidylcholine, what you've done is you've supplied the body with 50% or more of its methyltransferase capacity. 50% of your homocysteine is caused by making choline and making creatine. So if you eat those end products, you've released 50% of your methyltransferase capacity for making your melatonin and your serotonin and your dopamine and your adrenalins and all your neurotransmitters that require methyltransferase. All that neurofibrillary tangle stuff that I was talking to you about the brain for Alzheimer's, that's all caused by methyltransferase insufficiencies of the brain. And so freeing up that capacity, and that's why, in naive people like that aren't artificially lowering their homocysteine levels, elevated homocysteine is a very, very powerful biomarker of brain health and cardiovascular disease and other things.
Right. You said something earlier that I think a few people may be waiting for us to get back to, and I think it's the whole APOE4 phenotype that you were talking about and how plasmalogens, like I remember reading this in the book and that it made me kind of sit up, fold the page, highlight, like plasmalogens can basically turn a person who's either has one or two of the four alleles on that APOE, and I'm probably saying that all wrong, but basically they're an APOE 3-4 or APOE 4-4, which puts them at much higher risk for cardiovascular disease and cognitive issues, the whole 9 yards.
Later in life, not when they're young.
But that plasmalogen, keeping that plasmalogen bank account rich, can basically reduce their risk, assuming that they live their life well and whatnot. They can now be on equal ground with an APOE 3-3 or an APOE 2-3 even, which is a little bit mind-blowing, right? Because these are people that, if they understand what the risk factors are, kind of walk around with a bit of a knot in their gut thinking like, what can I possibly do to reduce my risk? And here you have a fairly elegant solution.
So these genetic risk factors, people, almost all genetic diseases are biochemically manifested. Okay. And so they're not magic. They have a mechanism behind them.
Yeah.
And the APOE4, so this is all related to cholesterol transport systems. And cholesterol is another thing that really is a pet peeve of mine. And we're killing people trying to get their cholesterol levels low. Yeah. And it's just atrocious. And it shouldn't even be an argument. The epidemiological studies of millions and millions and millions, we're talking a 12 million study in Korea, tens of thousands of people and other population studies. The optimal total cholesterol for longevity is somewhere in the mid 200s, full stop. Okay, once your total cholesterol level gets under 200, your all-cause mortality starts to double. Okay, it's not even open for discussion. The data is so robust in this manner. Okay, and so the other part is the HDL system. Okay, so first of all, I think people should just get a sense of cholesterol. I talk about plasmalogens being important. Well, they're not important as cholesterol even. Like cholesterol, is the key one of the keys molecules of the human body. And so your body has designed a whole bunch of systems to make sure it can regulate cholesterol levels. So when you get your blood test Okay, you're measuring cholesterol on transport proteins. Cholesterol is a fat. Okay, just like you can't just pour fat down your drain and expect it to flow, it's going to sit on all the walls. So we have to solubilize this fat. And the way the body solubilizes it is it uses transport proteins, these very, very big proteins that are very, very water soluble. And so all these lipid molecules catch a ride on these very water soluble particles. And so your body has to have a way of getting cholesterol to the cells of your body that need it, and a way of getting cholesterol out of the cells, and so it can share with other cells, so it can distribute the cholesterol, and also if a cell has too much, how to get rid of it. Okay, and you have these two main systems called your LDL, your low density lipoprotein, and your HDL, or your high density lipoproteins. And these are called apolipoproteins. So typically LDL is what's called apolipoprotein B. Okay, so these proteins all have slightly different genetic structures or protein sequences, if you will. And so apolipoprotein B, which is your LDL, is made in your liver, and its job is to send all the cholesterol to your cells. Okay, and so when your cells are hungry, say it says it needs cholesterol, it will pull LDL into the cell. It actually goes right into the cell, into the lysosome, like a little stomach of your cell, and it digests it, and it makes cholesterol available for that cell. And it actually comes in through LDL receptors. Okay, goes into your cell. That's how your LDL system goes. Now, your cells will make their own cholesterol, and if they make enough cholesterol, they're happy. They'll send more. So your Thanksgiving dinner, and you got extra apple pie, and you're taking it home. You're sending it home with leftovers, right? So the leftovers leave the cell, and they leave the cell through the HDL system. So the cell sends the cholesterol out of the cell, and that cholesterol then gets picked up with HDL and goes back to the liver. HDL particles do not enter the cell. They stay on the outside of the cell. So there's receptors, and this is where their phosphatidylcholine becomes really important. Because when your cholesterol is in your cell, it's non-esterified. It comes out, it has to get esterified, and then it goes on the HDL particle, and it takes it back to the liver. And so your peripheral system is a big network of international or interstate highway systems. Like you're moving cholesterol long distances, okay? And you got a circulatory system. And so the HDL system is the apolipoprotein A system. So A and B, and there's a bunch of these proteins, and we've known about them since like forever. Like they've been studied, I don't know, like the 40s and 50s and 60s. Like, so this is not a new thing. Yeah. We've been looking at these for a long, long time. So that's how the peripheral system works. Now the brain is a little different. Instead of this interstate highway system, your brain is like Chinatown. It's a bunch of little crisscross streets. You know, you can't even get a semi in there if you wanted to. Okay, yeah. So it's going to be, and so it has a different transport system, and it uses apolipoprotein E. Okay, so E is in your periphery. It's only about 5% or less of those proteins that transport cholesterol, but in your brain, it's almost 100% apolipoprotein E. And apolipoprotein E is ambidextrous. Okay, it has LDL functions and HDL functions. So the cell will actually absorb it. So for example, there's a rare disease of, can't even think of the exact name, but they have a mutation in apolipoprotein B. So they have an LDL mutation. What happens to these people? Their apolipoprotein E goes way through the roof, and they replace ApoB with ApoA. ApoE.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how it's kind of this, it's your backup molecule. But in the brain, it's almost exclusively apolipoprotein E. So it has LDL function and HDL function. Now, where the allele story comes in the apolipoprotein E, you have an E2 and E3 and E4 alleles. And those are related to not the LDL function of ApoE, but the HDL function. And it determines the efficiency of export rates.
Right.
Okay, so how efficiently a cell can export. So E2 carriers almost have excessive cholesterol export. So if you're a double E2, it's actually a very unhealthy person. Like it's too, right? E2, E3, the E3 kind of balances it a bit. And it's like having a kid that lives paycheck to paycheck, can't save. It's as soon as he has $1, he spends $1. Okay.
Right.
And the E2s are like that. They can't save cholesterol for the life of them. Whatever cholesterol they make, they get rid of. And E3 is kind of in the middle. And E4 is a cholesterol saver. So when the cell makes cholesterol, it holds it a little bit. So it doesn't get it doesn't release that cholesterol as much. It doesn't have the export function. So early in life, okay, when you have nutritional deprivation or you have bacterial infections or viral infections, the E4s are actually quite protective because they actually have a more robust cholesterol system in their cells. When they make their cholesterol, they can stave it. So they don't become cholesterol deficient as easily as an E2 or an E3.
Mm-hmm.
And normally the counter, so the two people in the three-legged race of cholesterol transport is the apolipoprotein E and the omega-3 DHA plasmalogens. And so DHA plasmalogens also control cholesterol export rates, but they control it through an enzyme called ACAT, cholesterol. It's a cholesterol esterifying enzyme that improves the clearance. And that's why plasmalogens clear up foamy macrophages, for example, and they reduce atherosclerotic plaques because they can increase the cholesterol clearance rate of cells. And so people who have naturally high levels of plasmalogens will have naturally high levels of HDL. They'll have naturally low levels of triglycerides, and they'll have good LDLs as well. So full circle here. So when you take a look at someone's total cholesterol levels, what you're really measuring is the health of their cells. Okay, when your cholesterol level gets low, that means the cells are unhealthy. They can't make enough of their own cholesterol. And so the other analogy I tell people, if you look at the whole system, you can think of it like the power grid. You have a power generating station, and then every house has their own solar panels. So if you're an efficient house and your solar panels are generating all the energy that you need, even excess energy, you're donating power back to the grid.
Yeah.
But if you're using too much energy in your cells and you can't, you're pulling energy in from the grid. The grid is your total cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if your total cholesterol levels, so why longevity is so associated with good total cholesterol levels, it means that your cellular health is good. It means that your cells are healthy. They're making all the cholesterol they need. They're donating a little bit back into the grid, and you're fine. And when your cholesterol levels get low, that means your cellular energy is impaired, and you can't make enough cholesterol, and now you're dependent on the power system and the external supply system. So that's how the story goes. So as we get older, so the APOE4 genotype has no negative consequences whatsoever for the most part for people that are under 60.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you get older, when our plasmalogen levels start dropping, okay, all of a sudden this counterbalancing weight where the plasmalogens were exporting cholesterol, okay, that gets impaired. And all of a sudden now the cells can't get rid of cholesterol. Like it's not enough. They're saving too much. They become misers now. They're not even, they can't, they're not sharing their cholesterol at all. And then they get too much cholesterol and their membranes start getting rigid. And when the membrane gets rigid, the amyloid precursor protein, the APP system gets shifted to the beta secretase system, and that's where we get amyloid plaques formed. That's why APOE4 carriers are associated with elevated amyloid plaque levels. And that's the mechanism. So it's a long story, but fundamentally, when you talk about genetics and these genetic risk factors, they're biochemically manifested. And APOE4 is a really good example of, you don't want to fight your genotype. Okay, that's like the epitome of self-hate. Your genotype is you, right? It's your job to create an environment that's within the window of your genotype.
Yeah.
It's not your genotype's job to deal with all your craziness, and so you remember and that's why the human body is adaptive. Like it doesn't really, your genes sit behind this nucleus veil, right? And they're listening. They've got proteins and saying, okay, what kind of crazy stuff are you going to do to me today? How am I going to react to this? And it's got a list of reactions that it can deliver for any given circumstance. And so this is where our genetic predispositions come in, because we have slightly different windows, right? And these windows are overlapping. And so if you have an MTHR deficiency, then your genotype has a limited ability to respond to a methyltransferase demand. Okay, so it's your job to make sure that you created resistance for that. Okay, and likewise for other systems of your body. So if you're APOE4, your cells have a limited ability to redistribute cholesterol. So it's your job to make sure that the countervailing system is up to snuff. And the good news is that this stuff is quite easily testable. And so you can look at these core systems, and like mitochondrial function, your peroxisomal function, cholesterol transport, sarcopenia measures. Like these are not actually that hard to measure. And that's what I tell people all the time, is that we don't have a lack of knowledge. Like the amount of scientific knowledge that we have is mind-blowing. The issue we have is applying it.
Yeah.
Okay. And getting it into a manner that people can understand. They don't get so psyched out. We got this jargon with human health that, people shut off. They say they think it's some sort of weird foreign space. And then, so what I spend a lot of time teaching people, this is your biochemistry. It's yours. You can, I can take your HDL levels. I can move it, your triglycerides. You have complete control over these markers. Okay. And it's not that hard actually. And so once people realize that this is you, and once you get these systems in place, you don't have to be so frightened of being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
Obviously any bad thing can happen to anybody, but at least you can get the core systems in place and live with a little bit of peace of mind.
Yeah. So how does the plasmalogen help the APOE4? Just by enabling better export of the fat out of the cell, basically.
Correct. It improves reverse cholesterol transport.
Nice. Okay.
And that's why the HDL system, people think HDL comes around and sucks cholesterol out of your cells. It doesn't. Okay. It responds to your cholesterol efflux rate. The more you efflux, the body says, hey, I need more HDL. And so it's the other way around. Okay. Your HDL levels increase because you have an increased demand for HDL. Okay. So you can't just go in there and say, I'm going to load myself up with HDL. That might be a short-term fix. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to strip a bunch of cholesterol out. It's the other way around. Your body will say, how much HDL do I need for this circumstance? And it will make that amount for you.
Wow. Yeah. No, and I love that you didn't use the words good and bad, because I find I get increasingly irritated with the idea of good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, because as you just explained it, they both have a function and they're necessary. You can't live without either of them.
Right. HDL is a big one. Like low HDL is and low phosphatidylcholine levels in your blood. Cancer, like all cancers are cholesterol mediated. Okay. Full stop. Okay. Period. Okay. This has been known since, I don't know, 60s, 70s. Okay. All cancer phenotypes are driven by cholesterol dysregulation. Okay. And by fasting, inability to maintain a fasting state in the cellular system. So if you take a look at the BRCA gene, like we have certain genotypes that are really good barometers of risk, and say, well, how does that work? And so it's the fasting state and the cholesterol regulation state that that really converts a cell becomes cancerous because it can't survive any other way, right? Cells do not want to become cancerous. They are forced to become cancerous. They are forced to a situation that the only way they can survive is to become cancerous. They don't set out to become it. They have no choice but to be it. And that's the other thing, that we think there's such a protagonistic approach when really it's adaptive. It's saying, here's a cell that can't maintain a fasting state, and so therefore it requires more glucose to live. Otherwise, if it doesn't get enough glucose, it will die. So it eventually upregulates glucose to stay alive, and then it becomes a parasite of its local environment, and it no longer becomes a good neighbor, if you will, and starts. And then as it becomes more and more, it learns to use glucose, and then as it learns to use glucose, it starts teaching the cells around it to do the same, because it's sucking glucose there. And then eventually the body says, oh, wow, there's a whole bunch of glucose utilization here. I think I better vascularize this system. And so then the body starts building, starts vascularizing it to meet the demand. So and that's where when people start really looking at human physiology as an adaptive state. And, even when you're doing exercise training, like I tell people, exercise is bad for you. Recovering from exercise is good for you. Okay. And so
it's such a way to put it.
Right. Because it's like, because we are creating oxidative stress, other than, increasing circulatory system. But what you're doing is you're teaching the body to adapt to a higher metabolic demand. So when you go running and you say, and all of a sudden you need more oxygen and more oxygenation than you do when you're sitting there, your body says, holy crap, this guy needs more oxygen. So I need to upregulate my mitochondrial function. I need to upregulate. And so it adapts to the environment you created for it. And
Right.
same thing with with resistance training, you are creating an environment that the body adapts to. And then what you've done is you've created a reserve capacity. So on the days that you aren't running, or the hours that you're not running, and the days that you're not lifting weights, you now have this excess capacity. So when I'm pushing my mouse around my desk, okay, it's not hard for me because I've adapted to a higher functional capacity. And
Right.
that's the whole point. And biochemistry is the same way. You want to create these reserve levels. And
Yeah.
your body won't naturally do this. Like you won't naturally become fit. You won't naturally become high functioning because the body has no need to. Like
Right.
unless there's a need for it, it's not going to do it. So
No,
you have to create it.
efficiencies, right? I mean, muscle is metabolically expensive. It's not going to build muscle unless you make it think that it needs muscle. I keep telling that to people. Like
Exactly.
if you don't tell the body you need this stuff, the body's like, dude. I mean, the body's almost like inherently lazy because the more efficient it can be, the lower it keeps its demands and the happier it is.
It's like algebra. Like who wants to learn algebra? I'm never going to use this. So, but the point is to teach yourself how to think logically, right? So
if I could do this, when you talked about, when I asked you that question about TBIs, you talked about how having a high plasmalogen level or adequate or an excess of plasmalogen virtually TBI proofs your brain. Maybe if not so much if you're an NFL football player, but it maybe even gives them bigger wiggle room for when they get bonked in the head. But what about someone who has a pre-existing TBI, someone who's had a number of concussions over?
Even more important there. See, this is another one of the big problems with the TBI world, is that when you get a concussion, it doesn't go away. Very, very rarely ever goes away. What happens, and people get the return to play designations, is you've learned to adapt to the concussion.
Right.
Okay, same thing with an autistic child. Like an autistic man in his 40s and 50s will have the same level of brain inflammation as he had when he was 9 years old. Okay, it doesn't go away. And what you do is you've adapted to it. You've created behavioral remapping. Okay,
Yeah.
the brain is very, very capable of remapping its systems. It's designed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have a concussion, your body learns to live with it.
Right. So it works around it, kind of thing. It builds sidebars.
Yeah. And there's good MRI studies to show not so much the remapping, but the MRI studies very clearly show that the white matter degradation doesn't dissipate for a very long time. And so if ever. And so that inflammatory part, so the plasmalogens and the mitochondrial support structure are incredibly important to be able to allow that system to heal itself. Okay. And so because obviously we don't play God. All we can do is we can provide the right materials and the right environment for the body to heal itself. And so in terms of the NFL story or a hockey player, actually, I'm a strong believer that if you are high on like the omega-9s, you can get a pretty big hit to the head and not have a concussion. Okay.
Well, maybe why some people are so much more susceptible to them than others, right? And could it be that, like when I was a kid, nobody talked about concussions. I mean, I fell over backwards figure skating. I didn't wear a helmet a number of times. Like, who knows? Maybe I had a bunch of concussions, but I never ended up I didn't get the spins. It's either I have a very hard head which is possible. Many people have said this to me in the past, but, or, is it possible that for whatever reason, I had a lot more resilience in my system than, say, the next person who, and it almost seems like these days somebody bumps their head on a kitchen cupboard and it's like, oh my God, I got a concussion. Like, I don't know if our threshold has lowered, or, as you were saying earlier, is it possible that whatever's happening in our world, less breastfeeding, and although I wasn't breastfed, but anyway, moving on. Is it possible?
It's a distribution. Okay. And it's absolutely right. So we live in a more pro-inflammatory environment, way more autoimmune like disorders in children than we've ever seen before. And so so the reason why one concussion makes the next concussion easier is that inflammatory part of the brain puts an extra load. You're consuming a bunch of plasmalogens. Right. And so you get this cumulative effect over time. And so, and like I always tell people, like the reason why this stuff kind of skates by so much is that the human system is quite resilient. Like I can provide a toxic dose of arsenic to 1,000 people and only 200 will get sick, right? And so we forget how distributive human physiology is, and how many different variables can come into play to be protective or a weakened state. So so clearly there'll be some people out there that can take multiple hits to the head and be fine. But there is a reason why these advanced athletes are so unbelievably prime human specimens, if you will, in their prime, and they age so terribly. Okay, they burn themselves out. And there's a lot of excessive exercise. This is where I'm a bit preachy. Like you have to give your body time to heal.
Yeah.
Okay? Like people, like a lot of these professional athletes, they think more is better. Okay, and they've never taken the chance to step back and say, what happens if I work out a little bit less per week? Do I get weaker? And if they ever actually take the opportunity to do that, they'll often find that they're actually stronger.
Yeah.
Their strength improves. Like, and you can only, even if you work out just a couple days a week versus 6 days a week, like, and I'm bad. I used to do that myself. Oh, 3 days this, 3 days that, cross train. And then I started working for a living at some point in time. It's like, I can't do this 6 day a week workout routine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 6 days and I'm going to put it into a 2-day Saturday, Sunday routine. Thinking, of course, hopefully I can just maintain myself, because there's no way I can stay strong working out twice a week, right? Well, 4 months later, I was stronger than I was when I was working 6. I go, what the hell is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. And so people have to learn to live with the empirical evidence in front of them. Okay, like we sometimes we let our brains override our guts. Like we think this is how it should work, when the reality is staring us in the face. Like you have to, like you said earlier, like we're all different, and you have to be sensitive to what works for you. Even with the intermittent fasting versus other types of diets, right? Don't listen to every single person. Like you can get these ideas and try them, but find out the one that actually makes you feel right. And those are the things that I think. So back to this whole thing about concussions. Yeah, like you want to, like there's some basics. There's basic nutritional and supplemental programs that you just want to get right. And the easy ones are, and they're just cheap as dirt out there. Like we're talking the basic of basic supplements. Okay. Like and then, the Plasmalogens, unfortunately, are not cheap because it takes a while to make them, but we're bringing those down in price as well.
That's awesome. You don't hear that very often.
Yeah, we just dropped the glia in half. We want people to get enough of a dose so that there's getting the benefit of it. And as we ramp up production, basically it's about us being able to not run out.
And build efficiencies. So, okay, so let's, we could talk for quite a long time. So, but we're going to have to wrap up soon. But what I'd like to do is give people some practical information now, right? And I mean, you've given them a lot of practical information, but when it comes to plasmalogens, here's a snapshot of what I'd like to leave the audience with is, I know you have a test, so I'd love to talk a little bit about when the testing is appropriate and how people can get it. And then the second thing will be, how does a person know, let's say they have a baby who who was not breastfed, and they're concerned that this child, it sounds to me like any child who hasn't been breastfed especially, could use maybe a little bit of plasmalogen in their drinks, for a certain period of time. So how long do we need to supplement plasmalogens in a child? And then in an older adult, again, like both on a preventative level. So let's say person A doesn't really have much going on, but they're thinking, like I'm sitting here thinking, well, I'm in my late 50s. Is there value in me saying, well, maybe I should shore myself up a little bit for the future, versus someone who's already got issues expressing? What do they do? And how do people find out what to do and how much to take?
Correct. So there's lots of information on my website, drgoodenowe.com. There'll be videos and education there. The plasmalogen story is really how much and when for maternal health and early childhood development. Probably all mothers should be on some plasmalogen. We have some anecdotal evidence that it improves breast milk volume, like your production capacity, because if they're on the omega-9s, their breast milk production goes up. And I think some of these issues that breastfeeding and childbearing is a very stressful on the female body. So I think those things are obvious. These should be part of it. And we can measure, we're setting up breast milk tests here so we can actually measure plasmalogens in the breast milk itself. It starts off really high in the colostrum, and then it goes down as the breast milk matures. By 3 weeks, it's about half as much as when it was in the colostrum stage.
But could that be that's because that's what the baby needs? Like from a natural perspective, the baby's, the body tends to produce what the child needs. What I guess we have to watch out for is that the mom's not deficient in a way that it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think no one knows the exact answer to that. I suspect it's just dilution.
Yeah.
I suspect it's just a matter of, as you produce more milk, it's physically demanding. Like it has to be made from scratch, and the mother needs plasmalogens for their own body as well. So I suspect just there's going to be distribution, okay, of people that can make lots, people that make very little, and people in between.
Yeah.
And then and so in terms of early childhood development, I think formula young children should be on small amounts of plasmalogen, like plasmalogen supplementation right away. Like it's not
like it sounds
it's easy. And then because it's just not worth the risk fundamentally. Like it's just not worth the risk of having an impaired myelination rate. And so and then if you have young kids playing sports and all the stuff, having some of that intermittently as required, you can blood test, that's no big deal. And look for mitochondrial issues and so on. You don't want to over test the kids, of course. And then as you get older, it really is food. Like it really is like I'm in my 50s as well. And then it's like I go through a bottle of Neuro a week. And I think it's a bigger, deeper conversation when you're talking about enhanced functionality, like the cholinergic system, improvement hypothalamus, human growth hormone, these type of your own personal exosomes, right? When people talk about exosome and peptides and these things are, your body makes them, right? And so and a lot of the cholinergic stimulation of the brain, of your pituitary, of these different brain regions, you want to keep those functionally active. And so realistically speaking, it's mostly a cost issue, quite frankly. If you can afford plasmalogens, you should be taking them forever. Like my dad's in his mid 80s. He functions like he's 60s. He's been on mitochondria, my support structure and plasmalogen for a few years now. And so this is kind of one of those situations, like the difference in mortality is 30 years. This is not a trivial number. Like it's a very, very scary number when you look at plasmalogen deficiency. You just don't want to run the risk. And so we don't know. Okay, this is uncharted territory. We don't know what the improvement of lifespan or improvement of functionality, because up till now, this human brain degradation has been an absolute
Like a gimme.
train wreck, right?
Yeah.
Like it just happens. Like there's no one talks about restoring the human brain,
Yeah.
right? Or refilling the brain. Like the brain, when the brain shrinks, it loses fat. Okay, like when a grape turns into a raisin, it gets dehydrated. But when the brain shrinks, it loses fat. It loses these plasmalogens. Okay, and it shrinks. And so these plasmalogen precursors, okay, have been available for a couple years now. Okay, and so we're going to be doing more and more MRI studies where we can backfill the brain, which I truly believe we can actually paint by number restore human brain function.
Yeah.
And we're clearly seeing it symptomatically, and we're seeing it physiologically, like in terms of inflammation and other things. So that chapter hasn't been written. I know personally, I'm stronger than I was in my 20s. My eyesight is back to where it was when I was 18. I never had perfect eyesight to begin with. I never get a headache. I'm on a computer all day long. I don't get brain fog. Okay. And then I don't have pain anymore. And so these things are real to me. And we do the biochemical testing, so I can check my cholesterol. When I first started this a year or so ago, is around 180. And I was going, whoa, okay, doctor, heal yourself here. Like, what the hell is going on here? So now I'm at 210. My HDL has gone from mid 50s to 75. My markers, like, so you can do all this, right? And so in my own personal experience is pretty robust. So I'm not stopping anytime soon. And so that's kind of, and so I typically take the omega-3s in the morning, okay, because it gives me function, and I never get immune to it. It gives me that energy boost. Like the DHA plasmalogen is like this. It just kind of opens your brain. Things get brighter. You have focus. Like I'm an intermittent faster. I typically have my first meal around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. I take most of my supplements on an empty stomach because I like to get that peak. Now everyone's different. I know people can't take supplements on an empty stomach, but for some reason that works for me. That's what I like. And so, and then I take the omega-9 plasmalogens about an hour before bed. I'll take, 2-3 mils of that. And that's where the brain is rebuilding itself. And I just continue that cycle.
Sorry, what do you take in the morning?
I take the omega-3, the DHA. That's the performance. It improves your neuromuscular performance, improves your cognitive performance. Then at night, before bed, I take the omega-9, which is for the myelination process, for the rebuilding process.
Okay, so last question for you before we close. So food-wise, are you also saying does eating, I mean, although it's problematic these days, but let's just leave that discussion aside, is eating fish that's high in omega-3 and consuming a lot of extra virgin olive oil as a starting point?
That's great. Yeah.
Helpful as well. Like these would be the foods that are and even eggs.
Yeah. So
like egg yolk in particular.
Yeah. Well, egg yolk doesn't have any plasmalogen in it, but the
choline and the
choline is great. So back to the basic nutrition and lifestyle, the things that are most beneficial for improving plasmalogen manufacturing are the same things that improve general metabolic health. So intermittent fasting, intermittent resistance training. Okay, resistance training is really important. So the things that you would naturally get a high triglyceride person to get down to lower mid triglycerides are things that are going to improve peroxisomal function.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, plasmalogens are made in your peroxisomes. So those things that improve peroxisomal function will improve your plasmalogens. And then when I talk about the N-acetylcysteines and the carnitines and things, those things that other making sure you have some vitamin C, make sure your uric acid level doesn't get low. That's another one of my pet peeves. People try to get you want your uric acid between 5 and 6. Like once it gets below 4, you're 4.5, you're NAD deficient. But anyway, so if you got a good redox capacity in your body, then your body's not excessively wasting plasmalogens. Like you don't want to waste the plasmalogens if you don't have to. So if you can preserve your plasmalogens on one side, okay, by keeping your redox proper, and if you can improve your production of plasmalogens on the other side by increasing peroxisomal function and metabolic health, then those are the two combinations that give you the best long-term plasmalogen manufacturing. And those people will have good high levels typically of their own, as long as they don't overdo it. So So a lot of athletes will have really good function, but if you work out beyond your ability to replace, okay,
Yeah.
you will bring them down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You're beating yourself.
yeah.
Okay. So
And that's the basic program.
intermittent resistance training, proper sleep is going to be critical so your body can actually do with the omega-9 to do.
And make sure your redox balance. Like, you know, we live in a pretty acidic environment. Like I'm a big fan of keeping your acidity levels down, and basic mitochondrial support stuff that we talked about.
Mhm. Love it. Okay, well, listen, I have a list of about 75 other questions I'd like to ask you, so we're going to have to do that on another day. We'll have a part two, kind of 2.0 plasmalogen discussion, but this has been a spectacular tour through the basics in any event to help people understand a little bit about, you know, what is basically like a new molecule that you've discovered and figured out what the heck it does and why is it important. And as I said to a couple of people, because I was so excited about this podcast, like, not only did he figure this out, but he can measure them and then you can tell you how to do something about it. Like, how cool is that?
And what's really cool is it's not a placebo. Like when you take a vitamin, okay, you do it intellectually because you know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, you don't feel it. Yeah.
Plasmalogens, you feel them. Like you will sleep the first time. Like you take some at nighttime, you will say, holy crap, I just sunk into my bed, I've slept. And you take the omega-3s, you will feel it. You will feel your brain waking up. I get people saying, wow, I can remember numbers now. Before I had to write down phone numbers, I remember numbers. Wow. You will actually, it's weird because you don't have to wait some intellectual exercise. I know it's good for me, so I'm going to do it. Yeah. You will actually, you know, you'll actually feel it. And that's kind of neat.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because in the bioregulator world, we have bioregulators that support the central nervous system and the brain and the pineal gland. And you have to wonder, what if I added plasmalogens back into the mix and did the mitochondrial support at the same time? Now that I'm giving the brain the signal to, you know, to renew and restore and rejuvenate, how much better is that going to happen?
Exactly. Like I'm a big fan and believer of the whole peptide world and the other advanced therapies. And my job is to get that groundwork done, right? And so that when you add these signaling molecules and you actually start directing, you know, you can actually deliver on those signals. Yeah. So you can actually, the body can actually fulfill the adaptation that you are forcing it into. Yeah, I'm like that's my job. My job is to kind of prevent negatives. Like sometimes what happens is say, why isn't this peptide working? Mm-hmm. Okay, is there something dragging its efficacy down? Is there something I don't know about? Like it should be working, it's not working. Well, maybe it's not working because there's another part of your biochemical system that's just underwater. Yeah. And if you bring that back up, okay, then these signaling molecules that are, you know, have good history of working in certain areas, you know, resume their function, if you will.
Yeah, well, my analogy for that, seeing as you're the analogy guy, my analogy for that is bringing a contractor in and saying, look, I want new kitchen cabinets, and not giving him wood.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got no wood. He's got a hammer and nails, but he's like, dude, I don't have any wood. I can't make it. So it's a little bit like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, Dayan, how do people reach you?
And so drgoodenowe.com, and that's where we have physician training as well. We do certifications, getting a network of doctors that understand this work, because that's a big thing, and practitioners. It's not just doctors. And then so drgoodenowe.com will have education. Prodrome.com is where you can get supplements. We'll hook you up with a doctor, get blood testing done, all that kind of stuff. And then other supplements we'll have available for people as well. And I think the products are also available on Amazon, so you can get the Glee and the Neuro on Amazon. But I always recommend getting involved with a practitioner like yourself or other skilled people. You can't underestimate the power of having someone who's spent some time to think through these things. Yeah. And they really help people identify things they're not thinking about. You know, just getting another person on your side figuring this stuff out is really valuable. And I think people should there's people like yourself, they know you guys have spent hours and hours and hours thinking these things through. And so you can't discount the value of someone who's been taking the time to think this stuff through. And the other thing, when you deal with practitioners and experts, is they have seen multiple different circumstances, right? And you are one, I'm one, but the ability for me to understand myself increases exponentially when I'm able to compare myself to others.
Yeah.
And that's really the power. And that's why when people get in the functional medicine field, they've learned all of these tricks, if you will, becomes more of an art, becomes half science, half art.
Yes.
To get the right path for an individual.
Absolutely.
So that's what I always tell people to do.
Thank you. And we'll have a discount code for you guys for the supplements as well. We didn't get it before the podcast, but you probably heard it in the intro. So if you're still here, thank you for still being here. And Dayan, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a total pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation.
You got it, Nat.
All
Have
right.
a great afternoon.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.